On May 21, 2018, a Japanese mountaineer passed away on Mount Everest's southwest face. This was his 8th time trying to summit the world's tallest mountain, having lost 9 of his fingers during previous attempts. The southwest face is considered to be one of the most difficult routes up Mount Everest, and this man was attempting to climb it solo, with no oxygen and only 1 finger. Some would praise his courage and determination for not giving up his dream of conquering the tallest mountain in the world, but just as many people would criticize his reckless actions. Although this man had summited 6 of the 7 tallest mountains in each continent, his critics would claim he had no right to call himself a mountaineer. He was nothing more than a glorified outdoor influencer, who had a tendency to over-exaggerate his achievements. Who was this man? Did he have a legitimate chance to succeed on his final climb? Or was he in way over his head, biting off more than he could chew in pursuit of internet fame and glory? This is the story of Nobukazu Kuriki. Kuriki was born in 1982 in Hokkaido, the northern island of Japan. Childhood friends would recall he loved to be in the spotlight, playing the main character in school plays, and often being the center of attention among his classmates. After graduating high school, he would briefly try his hand at becoming a comedian, but quickly found out it wouldn't work out and entered university in 2001. During his freshman year, he would begin mountaineering due to the influence of a girl he was dating at the time, and would spend much of his spare time climbing the mountains of Japan. In 2004, he would successfully summit Denali, also known as Mount McKinley, the tallest mountain in North America, with an elevation of roughly 6,200 meters, or a little over 20,000 feet. This was quite the achievement for someone who only had a few years of mountaineering experience, especially considering he made the ascent alone. This was the first time Kuriki had been outside of Japan, and he was instantly hooked to the idea of climbing big mountains across the globe. The next year, in 2005, he would successfully climb Aconcagua, the tallest mountain in South America, Elbrus, the tallest mountain in Europe, and Kilimanjaro, the tallest mountain in Africa. The following year, he would climb the Cairnstan's Pyramid, the tallest mountain in Oceania. In 2007, he would claim the summits of Cho-Oyu, his first 8,000-meter peak, as well as Vinson Massif, the tallest mountain in Antarctica. He had now climbed 6 of the 7 tallest summits in each continent, known as the 7 Summits, with the only one left being Everest, the tallest mountain in Asia. It was during this year that a television channel would air a documentary of Kuriki, and he would begin to gain a following. He would use this newfound fame to gather donations and sponsorships to fund his overseas expeditions. Kuriki would continue to expand his fan base with successful summits of Manasol and Dhaulagiri, both being 8,000-meter mountains. His expeditions would gain a large amount of media attention, and he would livestream these ascents online, considerably increasing his recognition, becoming somewhat of a household name. Generally speaking, mountaineers don't have the same level of recognition as athletes of sports such as soccer or baseball, but Kuriki was one of the few mountaineers a reasonable percentage of Japanese people could recognize. However, he did have his share of controversy. He would often claim he conducted his climbs solo, alpine style, without oxygen, and market himself as the man who summited 6 of the 7 summits alone, without oxygen. But if you know a little bit about mountaineering, you would immediately realize this is a somewhat peculiar claim to make. To elaborate, as you go higher up a mountain, the air becomes thinner, and you will not be able to absorb as much oxygen through breathing as you would be able to at sea level. To counteract this effect, mountaineers can use supplemental oxygen tanks to artificially increase the oxygen level. However, this is only required for very tall mountains, usually above 7,000 meters. The only mountain in the 7 summits above 7,000 meters is Everest. No one really uses supplemental oxygen for the other 6. So Kuriki claiming that he climbed the other 6 without oxygen is somewhat misleading. It may not be an outright lie, but it can be seen as a disingenuous way of making his achievements seem more impressive than they actually were. It was also questionable if his claims of climbing every mountain alone in alpine style was actually true. Climbing alone, alpine style, generally means you bring all of your gear with you, and you do not receive any form of external assistance once you leave base camp. People who went with Kuriki on his expeditions would claim he used fixed ropes set up by Sherpas, who are professional mountain guides, as well as having Sherpas carry gear and set up advanced camps beforehand. Furthermore, one of the 7 summits, Kilimanjaro, requires all visitors to have a professional guide with them, so he simply could not have been alone. Those with knowledge and experience of mountaineering had always been skeptical of Kuriki, considering him overrated, but the majority of his fanbase did not understand the intricacies of mountain climbing and simply saw him as an ambitious young man climbing the world's tallest mountains. In September of 2009, he would attempt to climb Mount Everest, widely publicizing this expedition as the moment he would claim his 7th and final summit of the tallest mountain in every continent. However, he would be forced to turn back at around 8,000 meters, due to fatigue and altitude sickness. This was the first time one of his expeditions had failed. In 2010, he would attempt to climb Annapurna, one of the most difficult 8,000-meter peaks, but failed. Later that year, he would re-attempt to climb Everest, but again had to turn back, this time only reaching 7,700 meters. He would continue to fail 2 more expeditions in 2011. Although he had failed 5 expeditions in a row, he still had just as many, if not more supporters than ever. He would make frequent media appearances and give speeches at various events, maintaining his image of a successful mountaineer who was just going through a streak of bad luck. However, his mostly positive perception from the public would begin to change over the next few years. In April of 2012, he would attempt to climb Shishapangma, another 8,000-meter peak located in Nepal. He would ultimately end up failing yet again, but he made some very basic mistakes along the way, which made people question whether he should be on these mountains in the first place. For example, when climbing 8,000-meter mountains, you generally want to arrive in the area 2 months or so in advance, to begin the process of getting your body used to the high altitude and reduced oxygen levels. This is known as acclimatization. But in this expedition, Kuriki arrived in Nepal on April 30th, with a planned summit day of May 24th, meaning he only had a little over 3 weeks. Because of this tight schedule, he did not have enough time to acclimatize properly, and would begin to suffer from altitude sickness during the approach to Shishapangma, at around 6,000 meters, far below the summit. He would then realize he forgot some essential gear halfway up the mountain, and had to go back to base camp to retrieve it. An unbelievably careless mistake. He would waste his energy and a few days of good weather because of this. The original plan was to make camps along the way at 6,700 meters and 7,500 meters, spending a night in each camp, gradually making his way up Shishapangma. But because of his already tight schedule and the days he had wasted due to forgetting his gear, Kuriki no longer had the option of making his ascent over multiple days. He then decided to make a 1-day rapid ascent from base camp at 6,200 meters to the peak of 8,027 meters and back down to base camp in 1 day. To give you an idea of how difficult this was, a handful of the best climbers in the world might be able to achieve this in good conditions. But Kuriki did not possess exceptional physical capabilities, and was already suffering from altitude sickness. His team strongly advised against this idea, but he went through with it anyway. Needless to say, he did not make it to the summit, fell into a crevasse on his way down, and had to have a Sherpa come and rescue him. He always had his critics, but after this expedition they would begin to gain traction, with some established mountaineers joining in, voicing their opinion that Kuriki's fame and media attention was disproportionate to his skill level. But he still had a large number of fans, and to prove to them, and to the world that he did indeed have what it takes, Kuriki would embark on his most challenging expedition to date. In August of 2012, he would conduct his 4th attempt in climbing Mount Everest. His previous 3 attempts had been via the South Col and North Col routes, the most popular and easiest routes to take. This time he would attempt the summit via the West Ridge, a much more challenging route. This was an irrational decision. Why choose a more difficult route if he had failed his previous 3 attempts with the easiest routes? It is assumed Kuriki did so to prove his capabilities to the world, as for this expedition he brought along a large camera crew to record his journey. But it seems he did not learn from the mistakes of the previous expeditions, as again he would schedule a very short plan to summit Everest. As a result, he again did not have enough time to properly acclimatize, and had to rush things to summit in a limited time frame. Kuriki would notice symptoms of frostbite in his fingers early on into the climb, but assumed it wouldn't be too much of a problem and continued up the mountain. This decision would end up costing him. Due to suffering from altitude sickness and bad weather, Kuriki was making slow progress. He had originally planned to make his final camp at 8,000 meters, but because of complications he could only make it up to 7,500 meters, and had to make yet another reckless summit attempt from there. During the final summit push, the frostbite in his fingers had gotten so bad he had to abort and turn back. Because he could no longer hold ropes or climbing gear due to his fingers being unresponsive, he had to get a team of Sherpas to drag him halfway down the mountain and then be airlifted to a nearby hospital. Doctors would tell Kuriki his fingers were most likely lost for good. After he flew back to Japan, doctors there would tell him the same thing. Unwilling to accept this fate, he would try strange folk remedies and spiritual treatments. Kuriki would update his social media with pictures of his mummified fingers, claiming they seemed to be getting a little better. But it was obvious to everyone that his fingers would not be coming back. Even his fans would begin to question his sanity, as the images he uploaded were outright creepy and unsettling. There were also rumors going around that he had been wearing fingerless gloves throughout his expedition, presumably to be able to use his phone. If so, that might have contributed to the severe frostbite he suffered. This would cause more controversy, as it means he prioritized updating his social media more than his own fingers. Eventually, he would end up amputating all of his fingers other than his right thumb. He didn't conduct any expeditions for the next couple years, and would gradually fade from the spotlight. However, Kuriki wasn't done. In 2014, he would successfully summit Broad Peak, a 8,000-meter mountain, his first successful expedition in over 5 years. But his resurrection would be short-lived. The next year, 2015, he would fail his 5th attempt at Everest. In 2016, he would fail his 2nd attempt at Annapurna, and his 6th attempt of Everest. He would try to climb the world's tallest mountain yet again in 2017, but failed for the 7th time. By this time he had become somewhat of a laughingstock. The mountaineering community thought of him as a joke. His fans no longer paid attention to him. It was getting harder and harder for him to secure sponsorships to fund his expeditions. Kuriki, always conscious of his public image, knew he had to do something outstanding to win back the attention he once had. So in 2018, he would embark on his most daring expedition yet. He would attempt to climb Everest for the 8th time, via the southwest face, alone, with no oxygen. To put things in perspective, most of his previous attempts were via the most popular and easy routes, which thousands of people have successfully summited. In contrast, the southwest face has only been summited successfully by a handful of the best mountaineers in the world, and they had done it as part of a team. What makes this route difficult is the fact you need to climb a near vertical face of Everest, requiring a much higher level of skill compared to the easier routes. Attempting to climb this route solo, without oxygen, and only one finger, was insane. If Kuriki was somehow successful, it would be a huge achievement, not only for him, but for mountaineering as a whole. In spring of 2018, Kuriki and his team would begin the approach to Everest. By 2018, the number of Kuriki's fans and sponsors had decreased. Along with them, the amount of money he could spend on his expedition had gotten much smaller. This lack of budget would cause his overall schedule to have far less days than what is usually allocated for an ascent of Everest. Bad omens would appear by the time they arrived at base camp. Kuriki began suffering from a fever. His fever got so bad he had to be airlifted back to a nearby hospital, costing him precious time. After recovering, he would begin his ascent, but while camping at around 7,400 meters, he began to feel extremely ill, most likely due to altitude sickness. It was so severe he felt he would not make it through the night, and decided to descend back to base camp through the darkness. A team of Sherpas were dispatched to meet him halfway. Sometime during the night, Kuriki stopped responding to radio calls from base camp. The Sherpas found his lifeless body the next morning. Judging from the damage Kuriki's body had suffered, it was assumed he fell off a cliff descending through the night. When news reached Japan, the reaction to his death had mixed opinions. Voices from the internet would primarily express surprise, as they didn't even know Kuriki was still attempting to climb Everest. Most people had assumed he retired after he lost his fingers, indicating Kuriki really had lost the fanbase and recognition he once had. People of the mountaineering community would claim, Kuriki's style had always been reckless. I believe he felt pressure from the media and public as a whole to keep pushing the envelope. I recall he genuinely enjoyed mountaineering in his early years, but recently I didn't see that enthusiasm anymore. Kuriki wasn't the most skilled mountaineer, but he definitely had an impact in introducing the sport of mountaineering to a wider audience, and I think we should give him credit for that. Kuriki has a YouTube channel with the subtitle, Share the Dream, with videos starting from his early successful summits, ending with a radio transmission from his fatal ascent of Mount Everest in 2018. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested. What do you think of Kuriki? Was he a reckless idiot, virtually throwing away his life in pursuit of internet fame and glory? Or can you respect how he was willing to put his life on the line for achieving his dream of climbing the 7 summits of the world? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching until the end. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. I'll see you next time.